Imagine a decorated general handcuffed on a deserted road, her uniform shine drowned out by bigotry. Olivia Monroe's call to the Pentagon wasn't just a lifeline, it was a challenge when the system weaponizes its badge. How do we reclaim our dignity? If you're ready to expose these abuses, hit like, comment 1 to join the fight, or 2 if you think it's all political theater. Subscribe now and be the first to witness how one call can ignite a revolution in justice. A black SUV rolled into Oak Valley just as dusk settled in fog. The town's empty street, slick with rain and scattered puddles, stretched past silent storefronts. Avery's gloved hands, weathered from helicopter harnesses and desert storms, took the wheel with the quiet precision of someone used to command. She peeled off each glove, revealing calloused palms that had never known luxury, then wiped a stainless steel cup in the console, an old habit from briefings and battles far from here. Through the rain-spattered windshield, she watched 2 officers cross into a diner parking lot. Glance after glance, she readied herself, a paper map, creased from countless stops, a meeting time scribbled on a slip of paper. Still time to pause. The neon of Linda's diner flickered across the road. An Avery uniform pressed to perfection stepped inside. No introduction needed. In that quiet moment, her presence spoke volumes. She belonged everywhere, even here where calm often hides the chaos no one dares to name. The diner fell silent for a heartbeat as Avery entered, each patron's glance sliding over her like a faint breeze, curious but hesitant. A man, nursing a beer, barely looked up, then returned to his phone. A woman paused mid-bite to narrow her eyes. An elderly couple shared a wordless nod. Avery walked with perfect poise toward a window table, her uniform impeccable, every step as measured as a heartbeat. Only Linda, the waitress with gentle curls, met her gaze and offered a warm, unhurried smile. "Sit wherever you like." Avery removed her gloves and hat in one fluid, almost ceremonial motion, then ordered a hamburger and black coffee with the same quiet command she carried herself. From the window seat, Avery surveyed the diner's orderly rhythm, the steady drip of the coffee machine, the neat spice racks, and felt the subtle shift in the air. Beyond the glass, a white patrol car idled in the lot, headlights off, but engine humming softly. Inside, 2 officers sat unmoving, their profiles etched in the windshield's glow, broad-shouldered Mason Blake and watchful Darren Fisk. Their stillness spoke of intent rather than chance. Avery lifted her water glass to her lips, eyes narrowing just slightly. Outside, a breeze swept fallen leaves across the wet asphalt, as if whispering a warning. All was calm, far too calm in this quiet town on the edge of chaos. No longer just a layover, but the start of something far beyond any map's scope. Mason Blake's eyes pinned Avery through the fogged window just as she lifted her coffee, an old, familiar signal that made her heart echo with memories long buried. In the academy, draped in steel gray uniforms, she had been the only black cadet and the first woman in strategic command. When her name vanished from the final postings, no one protested. The doubt and quiet weariness she faced then now reflected in Blake's stare. "You don't belong here." She placed her cup down, letting its warmth anchor her against the ash of old injustices. Pinned medals hid years of being underestimated, too sharp to trust, passed over for men with weaker records. She recalled the colonel who sneered at her leadership of an all-male unit, only to sign her promotion later with a grimace. Outside the patrol car idled in shadow, Blake and Darren Fisk fixed on her, as if her mere presence demanded explanation. Inside, life in the diner carried on. Linda, steady kindness, a man matching her face to some unseen dossier, reminders that attention often begins simply because of the skin you wear. Avery breathed in the scent of damp asphalt and autumn leaves. She wasn't here to prove herself or confront their questions. She just wanted dinner, rest, and the simple right to exist without spectacle. Yet as Fisk smirked and Blake's gaze held fast, she knew this quiet stop was anything but ordinary, and that her story was nowhere near its end. Avery tilted her head, recalibrating between memory and the moment. She wore no armor but the crisp uniform on her back and the resolve honed from walking into rooms no one dared enter. Someone who'd stared down life and death didn't flinch under a dismissive glare. What drained her most wasn't the threat, but the endless proof demanded by a society that refused her peace. She stepped out of the diner into the chill, every footfall echoing on damp asphalt. Her SUV lay 20 paces away, half hidden under a tree parked beside the local cruiser. As her hand moved for the keys, a sharp command cut the air. Stop! Don't touch the vehicle. A flashlight beam seared her eyes, stirring wartime memories. Without blinking, Avery turned hands at her sides, every motion deliberate. Mason Blake stood before her flashlight in one hand, the other hovering near his holster. Nice outfit, he drawled, eyes flicking over her medals. She didn't flinch. Raising her left hand, she spoke evenly. I am Lieutenant General Avery Wallace, United States Army. My ID is in this jacket. Blake's sneer flickered to uncertainty as Darren Fisk sauntered forward, eyebrow raised. Avery produced a worn leather wallet and revealed the ID photo name rank serial undeniable. Blake leaned closer. Could be fake. Fatigue, not anger, filled her chest. Facts are facts, she said, voice sharp as a whistle, and you just shined a light in the face of a senior U.S. Army officer without cause. Behind them, Fisk's discomfort showed Blake remained ice cold, and the patrol car's engine purred its silent testimony. Linda pushed the diner door open and stepped into the parking lot, concern etched on her face as she saw Avery flanked by two officers. She moved forward, lips parted to speak, but Blake's raised hand cut her off. Go back inside, ma'am. This doesn't concern you. Linda froze, then glanced at Avery as if to say, I'm watching. I won't stay silent if this crosses the line. Avery met her gaze, offering a small, grateful nod, then turned back to Blake. Her posture never wavered, her eyes steady. In that cold nod exchanged under the dim lot lights, her resolve blazed brighter than anger, a warmth forged over a lifetime of proving herself in rooms no one else dared enter. With slow deliberation, Avery held out her military ID. Avery D. Wallace, Lieutenant General. United States Army, crisp text and Department of Defense seal unmistakable. Blake glanced at it, disdain hardening his features. Doesn't look like anyone I know, he sneered. Definitely fake. His words carried the weight of prejudice, skin color, age, and gender overriding irrefutable proof. Fisk chuckled behind him. Scammers are clever these days. But Avery didn't flinch. You can verify through Fort Bragg or the DOD. She said, voice low and unshakable. The internal number is right here. Blake's hand drifted toward his holster. Nope, he replied, turning on her. If it looks fake, it is. Avery braced herself for the silence that followed until the harsh snap of handcuffs punctured the night. Before she could protest, her arms were yanked behind her back, her wallet splashing into a puddle. The metal cuffs clicked shut as she bent over the cold hood of her SUV, dignity stripped away by unfounded suspicion. Her back slammed against cold steel, her head turned to the side, eyes wide and unbroken. Beneath the flicker of a lone streetlight, her three-star insignia gleamed in vain, invisible to men who saw only dark skin and believed rank was granted by a colder white voice. Avery could have incapacitated them both in a heartbeat. Elite combat training, hard-earned respect from the fiercest troops, but she held still, letting time stretch thin. If Oak Valley had never learned that law wasn't a tool for humiliation, tonight would be its first lesson. A sudden clatter drew every diner into the night air. Half-eaten plates abandoned forks midair. They froze at the tableau, a black general pinned to her own SUV, motionless and exposed. Linda surged forward, apron-stained hands fresh from the stove, her voice breaking through the hush. Stop it, Mason, she did nothing. Blake shoved her aside without a word. Fisk eased Linda back, smooth as bad habit. Their practiced silence spoke volumes. This was no rookie mistake. Then a small figure appeared, an 8-year-old boy in stained kitchen clothes, sandals squeaking on tile, eyes locked on the scene. Clutching his mother's apron, he whispered loud enough for every adult to hear, Soldiers get arrested too, Mom. What about Dad? His question struck the asphalt like a boulder, shattering the spectators' stunned voyeurism. No one moved. No one spoke. In that breathless moment, every bystander realized their own place in the silence. Avery stayed pinned against the car, but her gaze softened as she looked at the boy who'd spoken up. His question cut through the night's tension. Soldiers get arrested too. In that moment, Blake and Fisk realized they'd stepped out of their comfort zone into a space where humility outweighed authority. The metal door clanged shut behind her, and she found herself alone in a bare holding cell lit by a flickering bulb. The red marks on her wrists still stung, but her posture never wavered. 3 decades of service had taught her that true strength lay in calm defiance. Memories of Kandahar crossfire and Pentagon briefings flooded back reminders that inequity often hides in plain sight. Tonight wasn't about privilege or calling in favors. It was a test of character for those wearing badges, and they'd already failed. With each tick of the clock, Avery's mind raced ahead to Fort Bragg, where her absence would leave a crucial void. She didn't need to phone in. She needed to witness how far they'd go when they thought no one was watching. A faint echo of boots on concrete signaled the guard's arrival, and she straightened her shoulders. The door swung open, revealing a man whose file she'd studied, a former sergeant disqualified for ethics violations. Now face to face under harsh fluorescent light, the real interrogation was about to begin. She'd studied every line of his file-delayed rescues when a black soldier was simulated in danger. 3 incidents of biased remarks, a pattern unfit for any integrated unit. As a major, she'd stripped him of command not for spite, but principle no battlefield leader should let prejudice decide who lives or dies. Night after night, she drafted equity policies and defended unfairly docked troops, arguing that true armor is ethical. Now the man she barred from the Hall of Honor stared at her across the cell, smirking, praising her uniform's craft like a con artist's disguise. He didn't know her face, but she'd reshaped protections. He'd violated his own words, a confession she archived in memory as evidence that bigotry never disappears. It merely disguises itself. The door swung open again, flooding the room with harsh corridor light. A gray-haired chief stepped in, eyes cold, with decades of seeing every excuse and none too believing. He'd snapped to attention the moment he heard her name, not a routine arrest, but a test of all he'd sworn to protect. Avery's posture didn't waver. The red cuff marks on her wrists glowed like scars of honor. Under the flicker of that single bulb, she looked less like an inmate and more like a general awaiting judgment from a board far sterner than any local badge. Her spine rigid, gaze unwavering, she filled the cramped room with a presence no badge could match. The chief, accustomed to defiance, found himself squinting at the tempered steel in her eyes. He rifled through Blake's file name DOB rank, but each line dissolved under the weight of the woman before him. He asked her name, voice stripped of its usual authority. She didn't answer. She simply produced her phone and called Langston Pentagon. When the deputy secretary herself answered, her calm command cracked the tension. "Release Lieutenant General Wallace now." The chief's hand trembled as he swallowed. Hard turned the key and snapped the cuffs open. She rose not as a freed prisoner, but reclaiming her rightful command, each step a silent rebuke to small-town prejudice. Behind him, Blake and Fisk stared, nameless guilt etched on their faces. Blake's smirk vanished, replaced by a dry gulp, while Fisk gripped a collapsing coffee cup as if it might shatter under his shame. The neon glow no longer signified their authority. The room had become a courtroom presided over by unyielding truth. In that charged silence, Lieutenant General Wallace stood tall, 3 silver stars glinting defiantly, while 2 officers, once convinced of their power, realized they were the ones under judgment. Blake stumbled back, sweat trickling down his neck as the weight of his misjudgment pressed on him. No longer the one in control, he felt every smug remark return like a blade cutting at the illusion of his authority. Fisk wobbled beside him, eyes wide with the realization that Avery's uniform bore missions he'd never be entrusted to guard. In that charged stillness, they both knew they'd made a catastrophic mistake. With a single click, the cuffs fell away. Avery straightened her jacket, each motion crisp and deliberate, then paused at the 3-star insignia on her shoulder, an anchor of her resolve. Without raising her maws, she addressed Grimes, Blake, and Fisk. This wasn't an error. It was a choice. You chose not to see me because power in your mind wears a different face. Honor isn't granted by assumption. It's earned through true service. Her calm clarity dissolved the walls of their prejudice. She donned her cap and walked to the door, leaving behind 2 officers stripped of their borrowed authority. "If you still believe skin color measures loyalty," she said, "hand on the handle, you've stood on the wrong side for far too long." As she stepped into the hallway's light, the silence that followed marked the end of one era and the beginning of another one, where the truth of her rank and the strength of her character could no longer be denied. No one in that room guessed she'd spent the night in handcuffs yet. Back in Oak Valley, a single video changed everything. Linda, the diner's owner, stood trembling but steady, recording as Officer Blake clamped cuffs on a uniform bedecked with stars. The silence around her only sharpened Linda's bravery, and that clip, shared from a personal account to military forums, went viral within hours. By afternoon, every network ran the headline, Lieutenant General wrongfully detained. Veterans, families, civil rights groups, and ordinary citizens took to the streets holding signs, "Who serves her?" and posters reading, "Invisible doesn't mean non-existent." Twitter and CNN buzzed with outrage. Even Fox News, after initial silence, aired it late at night. The Pentagon tweeted confirmation of her active duty. Public pressure forced a formal review. Law firms called next offers to sue Oak Valley for unlawful detention, defamation, abuse of power. Hundreds of pages of briefs promised to bring the town to its knees. Avery listened in silence, knowing that real change often comes not from courtroom victories, but from shifting hearts. At Fort Bragg, sunlight cut across a polished table where Avery now opened a file titled Mirror Military Integrated Reform for Racial Response in Operations. This wasn't a reactionary measure. It was born years earlier from conversations with black soldiers questioning whether they were comrades or merely tools. Now her long-standing reform finally met its moment. The Mirror proposal laid out a complete framework for retraining local police with military-grade standards in racial response crisis engagement and community dialogue. It wasn't just a curriculum, it was a philosophy. Anyone entrusted with weapons and badges must be schooled in humanity as much as authority. That morning, she signed the document in silence, her crisp signature, a reminder that ethics are not optional virtues but binding mandates. Rather than staging a media spectacle, she sent Mirror to the governor with a brief note. How many small errors have we let fester, and when will we finally look in the mirror? 3 days later, the governor publicly committed to a statewide summit, piloting Mirror, thanking her in bold italics. Linda, the diner owner, whose brave video sparked the movement, was next invited by the State Human Rights Commission. Standing before officials in Raleigh, she admitted, "I may not know the law, but I recognize wrong when I see it, and I refuse to let my town's children grow up in that silence." Her simple truth moved the room more than any report could. In Oak Valley, mandatory reforms began immediately. Blake and Fisk were suspended, a new chief from Atlanta was hired, and police statements appeared in English, Spanish, and Creole. Schools and churches now host forums on ethical policing, and although she could have sued, she chose instead to change the system itself because one story can spark a generation's reform. Darren Fisk sat rigid, staring at the screen until he realized Avery. His eyes weren't on him, but on a system that let this go unchallenged. No one was asked to confess, yet by day's end, every officer understood that old procedures had become shields for indifference. In the weeks that followed, patrol schedules gave way to community dialogue bulletins, and the chief's door, once always closed, opened every Monday with a simple sign, "Ready to listen." The slowest change came from Luther Grimes, who'd always prided himself on handling it. Standing before the council to unveil reforms, he admitted, "I didn't act wrongly, but I failed to stop it." That lapse is inexcusable. His public apology drew no applause, only Linda's gentle nod of acceptance. In subsequent Mirror sessions, Blake asked shaky questions about unconscious bias and how threat becomes prejudice in uniform. Fisk, during a drill, finally owned up, "I thought I wasn't biased, but I've said too many jokes and made too many snap calls." Avery never returned to Oak Valley. Her name lives in every audit, not as homage, but as a warning. One mistake can shatter trust. Under the station's new motto, "A badge guards dignity, not enforces bias," Linda found her life forever changed. The diner owner who once claimed her world ended at the counter was invited to teach civic courage and oversight of power at Virginia State. On her first day apron on, she asked her students, "Has anyone here thought staying silent makes the bad things go away?" Silence fell because now everyone knew it never did. Linda stood before her class and recounted that night, Avery's steady gaze, the little boy's trembling question, "Will they arrest my dad too?" and how her hands shook holding the phone, but never lowered it. She needed no flourish. Each simple fact cut deep. When a student asked if she wasn't afraid, Linda admitted she was terrified. Most of all, that one day her own child would watch that video and ask, "You were there, what did you do?" Her honesty compelled Professor Knox to rewrite the syllabus, making Linda, the diner owner, an honorary advisor on civic courage. Back in Oak Valley, a listening table now stands where Avery sat, piled with notes of apology, gratitude, and overdue truce. Messages tucked into a wooden box labeled, "Words we should have spoken sooner." At Fort Bragg, morning light lay differently across the drill grounds, once a site of brute training, now hallowed by battles against prejudice. Lieutenant General Avery Wallace left a strategic briefing without applause, knowing real victory happens quietly afterward. Beneath a sentinel oak waited Lieutenant Brianna Ree uniform, immaculate eyes both hopeful and haunted. I fear every step feels like a performance, she confessed. Avery paused, placed a hand on her shoulder, and shared the truth she'd learned in those cold briefing rooms. You're not walking alone. You're clearing the path so those behind you won't have to prove they belong. Brianna lifted her head, steps now measured and unburdened, as Avery watched a new generation claim the ground she first dared to tread. I don't know how they'll see you, Wallace, he admitted, but I want to see how you make them unable to look away. That recognition, valuing her resolve over her skin, was a gift Avery longed for every black woman in uniform. That afternoon, she met privately with North Carolina's governor, a former Homeland Security secretary. No slides, just 3 folders, the Oak Valley Mirror report, her Fort Bragg evaluation, and a roster of 47 officers who'd volunteered for her training. This isn't reform for headlines, she said, voice, steady eyes meeting each person. It's a restructuring rooted in moral discipline. When aides quibbled over budgets and timelines, the governor cut through it. Who teaches this statewide? Avery smiled. I know someone who serves coffee and once taught a whole town what courage looks like. 1 month later, spring arrived in Oak Valley, and the question on every lip wasn't the weather, but who truly deserved the badge. In a packed hall auditorium, Chief Luther Grimes, sunlight carving pride and late-coming clarity across his face, stepped to the podium. I believe silence over a small mistake preserved order, he began quietly. But detaining Lieutenant General Wallace showed me that silence can crack a community's trust. He paused, chest heavy with medals and remorse, and announced his resignation, effective immediately. No applause followed, only a hush of respect for a man who chose action over self-preservation. At the press conference, a petite woman in crisp uniform took the stage as his successor. Her posture precise, ready to lead Oak Valley into a new chapter of accountability and honor. Elena Morales from Philadelphia, once denied entry to the academy because her mother spoke no English, now leads regional mirror protocol training and drafted 3 bold reforms: mandatory retraining for all officers within 90 days, a community oversight council of faith groups, schools, businesses, and veterans with real review power, and full online publication of every arrest report. Skeptics fell silent. A week later, Morales invited Lieutenant General Avery Wallace to Oak Valley for the first retraining session. In a local high school, Miss Grant showed students Avery's handcuffed image. Caden, the boy who watched from the diner, declared, "I'll be a soldier to stand where someone needs me," inspiring countywide civic ethics courses. At Linda's seat 7 still holds a note. We saw, back at the Pentagon, Avery files her National Mirror Protocol expansion proof that true reform starts with courage and reflection. Her name now tops the Mirror Protocol pilot review, an initiative Congress sealed to reshape justice from the ground up. In Washington, she still brews her own black tea, pausing as if each choice demands the same quiet rigor. Beside her medal sits a child's note. I want to be a soldier, so no one has to bow their head again. For a packed committee, she skipped slides and said, my story isn't new. It's every person stopped for their skin tone. I'm not asking for pity. I'm demanding action. Laws don't build trust, behavior does. No town or officer was named because this wasn't about individuals, but a system propped up by silence. One lone clap, Linda's in the back row, sent that truth from Capitol Hill into classrooms and precincts. She didn't shout, she rewrote the rules. Now the question is ours: when we see injustice, will we stay silent or step forward and change things? This dramatic story teaches us that power must never strip away dignity. When even a top leader is mistreated for their skin color, the message is clear: justice must rise above all prejudice. If you were in that position, you wouldn't stay silent. You'd use your voice to expose injustice, demand transparency, and push for deep reform. Next, you might establish a support fund for victims, partner with civil organizations to oversee law enforcement, and organize mandatory bias awareness training. Will racism still exist by 2050? If we remain complacent, yes. But if each of us dares to stand up, hold one another accountable, and keep fighting for fairness, we can very well eradicate the remnants of bias before mid-century. Disclaimer: this story is entirely fictional. All characters and events are creations of the author and are not intended to reference or criticize any real person. It is designed to raise awareness of responsibility, justice, and the importance of treating one another with respect and dignity. We firmly oppose all forms of violence, prejudice, and injustice. Please consider this before viewing.